Welcome to Mysteries and Crime, where shadows linger and truth cuts deeper than fiction. Tonight, we journey into the chilling story of Katherine Knight, the first Australian woman sentenced to life without parole. Clue for tonight's case: what disturbing act was allegedly prepared but never consumed? In the small town of Aberdeen, New South Wales, two lives collided in a night of unimaginable horror. In February of 2000, John Charles Thomas Price, a father, a worker, a man with a tragic fate, met a brutal end at the hands of his partner, Katherine Knight. On the morning of February 29th, 2000, co-workers at the Tomago abattoir grew concerned when 52-year-old John Price failed to show up for work. It was unlike him. He was reliable, dependable, always early. After calls went unanswered, one colleague visited his home at 10 Street, Andrews Street, Aberdeen. What awaited inside was beyond comprehension. At approximately 8 a.m., officers arrived. The front door was locked, but there were signs. Bloodstains on the front step. A chilling stillness beyond the glass pane. Police forced entry. What they found inside was a scene so grotesque, so unimaginable, that hardened detectives reportedly staggered from the house, visibly shaken. John Price's body had been mutilated, skinned from head to toe. His hide hung from a meat hook in the living room archway. His head was later discovered in a pot on the stove. The accused, Katherine Knight, was found unconscious in the house, allegedly having taken a cocktail of prescription pills in what police believed may have been a failed suicide attempt. The quiet town of Aberdeen would never be the same again. John Charles Thomas Price, known as Pricey by those close to him, was 52 years old. A well-liked father of 3, John was a seasoned worker at the local mines in Aberdeen, New South Wales. Friends described him as easygoing, reliable, and deeply devoted to his children. He had been previously married and maintained a cordial relationship with his ex-wife, with whom he shared custody of the children. John's co-workers remembered him as dependable and level-headed, a man who didn't involve himself in drama. That would change in 1995 when he began a relationship with Katherine Knight. Initially, the relationship seemed to bring comfort. Katherine, too, worked in the meat industry and shared John's blue-collar lifestyle. But over time, John's friends noticed changes. There were reported instances of violence, volatile behavior, and disturbing threats allegedly made by Katherine. John reportedly tried to end the relationship multiple times. Each time, he was drawn back in. Some say out of guilt, others say out of fear. In the months leading up to his death, John confided in friends and colleagues that he feared for his life. He even showed a restraining order application to co-workers the day before he was killed. Despite all this, he returned home that evening, not knowing it would be his last. Katherine Mary Knight was born in Tenterfield, New South Wales, in October of 1955. Her early life was marred by trauma. According to reports, she experienced severe abuse, both emotional and physical. Her upbringing in a chaotic household allegedly contributed to later behavioral instability. As a teenager, she exhibited violent tendencies and left school at age 15 to work at an abattoir, a job she reportedly loved. Co-workers would later claim she had an unsettling comfort with gore. She quickly gained a reputation as volatile and aggressive. Relationships were intense and often ended in violence. She was reportedly involved in multiple domestic incidents, some involving weapons. Katherine had several children with different partners. Each relationship ended in turmoil. One former partner claimed he survived a stabbing. By the time she met John Price in the mid-90s, her history was well known in the town. Despite her disturbing past, Katherine managed to portray herself as a victim, often switching between vulnerability and rage with unnerving speed. Law enforcement had been called multiple times over the years, yet she often evaded long-term consequences. One investigator would later say, "We always knew she was dangerous, just not how dangerous." Her escalating behavior, her fascination with knives, and her detailed knowledge of slaughterhouse methods all seemed to converge in one horrific act. The signs were there, but no one could predict what she would do next. On the night of February 29, 2000, John Price returned to his modest brick home on St. Andrew's Street in Aberdeen. A quiet street in a quiet town. He had worked a full shift and spent time with friends at a nearby pub. According to witness accounts, he was in good spirits, but also cautious. Earlier that day, he had told colleagues he feared for his life and had officially filed for a restraining order against Katherine Knight. Despite this, he returned home. Unbeknownst to him, Katherine had also returned, reportedly letting herself in while he was at the pub. Court records show she had prepared the house and herself. What followed was a sequence of events that investigators pieced together only after careful analysis of the crime scene and autopsy. At some point after 10:30 p.m., Katherine allegedly stabbed John while he was asleep in bed. According to forensic evidence, he awoke mid-attack, struggled, and fled the bedroom. Blood trails showed he made it down the hallway, opened the front door, and almost escaped, but he was pulled back inside. The coroner's report would later confirm 37 stab wounds across the chest, neck, and back. Many wounds were deep, precise, and consistent with expert knowledge of human anatomy, allegedly drawn from Katherine's experience in the abattoir. The brutality didn't end there. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, Katherine skinned John's entire body, reportedly in a single, continuous piece, and hung the hide from a metal meat hook affixed to the living room archway. The display was gruesome, calculated, and cold. She then allegedly decapitated him. His severed head was discovered hours later inside a large stock pot on the stove, partially boiled with vegetables and meat. Near the stove, police found place settings laid out on the table. Beside them, name cards with the names of John's children. According to reports, authorities believed Katherine had intended to serve parts of his cooked remains to his children, though she never carried this act out. Beside her unconscious body, investigators found a handwritten note, a rambling accusation against John, claiming he had allegedly assaulted her daughter. The claims were unverified and reportedly false. The crime scene was described by detectives as one of the most horrifying they had ever witnessed. A senior officer reportedly said, "It was the worst thing I'd ever seen. I hope I never see anything like it again." The forensic evidence, the physical trauma, the grotesque staging, all pointed to a premeditated act driven by rage, control, and perhaps something even darker. Katherine was arrested at the scene. She was unresponsive, allegedly due to an overdose of pills. But she survived. And what followed was one of the most chilling legal cases in Australian history. From the moment officers entered 10 Street Andrews Street, It was clear they were dealing with a case unlike any other. Detectives with the New South Wales Police Homicide Squad immediately secured the property. Forensic teams worked meticulously, documenting every blood smear, every trace, every object out of place. They established a timeline using autopsy results, blood pattern analysis, and the victim's known movements. They also reviewed security footage from nearby shops and gathered statements from Price's co-workers, some of whom confirmed he had spoken of death threats from Knight in the days prior. Still, investigators faced obstacles. Katherine Knight offered no confession. In fact, during police interviews, she claimed to remember nothing of the night in question, a stance she maintained throughout. Despite her silence, the overwhelming physical evidence, from her fingerprints to blood-stained clothing to the positioning of the scene, would soon form an airtight case. While the crime scene was rich in evidence, the complexity of the violence posed challenges. The act of skinning a human body without damaging the underlying tissue required unusual precision. Investigators noted it was carried out with a skill rarely seen outside professional butchery, consistent with Knight's work history. DNA confirmed that all material found on the knives, stove, and in the pot belonged to John Price. Still, establishing intent was a separate hurdle. The defense initially considered a plea of insanity, and forensics teams were asked to evaluate Knight's mental fitness. Psychiatrists determined she was mentally competent to stand trial, though she exhibited signs of various personality disorders. Ultimately, the strength of the forensic evidence, including pathology reports, tool mark analysis, and blood spatter patterns, proved conclusive, and in the absence of any other suspects, the trail led only to Katherine Knight. The town of Aberdeen, population just over 2,000, was rocked to its core. Neighbors were stunned, horrified, and many deeply afraid. People who knew Katherine Knight said they had always sensed something off. But no one imagined this. Parents became more protective of their children. Locals began locking doors at night, something many hadn't done before. Vigils were held quietly for John Price, though few could speak openly without revisiting the horrific details. Some reportedly left town altogether, unable to cope with the lingering darkness that hung over St. Andrew's Street. Aberdeen would never forget. As details of the crime surfaced, Australian news outlets seized on the story. Headlines read like scenes from a horror film. House of Horrors, The Butcher of Aberdeen, Australia's Cannibal Killer. Television segments ran daily for weeks, featuring interviews with psychologists, criminologists, and horrified residents. International outlets picked it up too. The BBC, CNN, and others referred to it as one of the most disturbing domestic crimes ever reported in Australia. Despite efforts to keep trial details limited, leaked information fueled public fascination. The media didn't just report the crime. It amplified the legend. From the beginning, there were no other suspects. Investigators were clear. Katherine Knight acted alone, but questions persisted. Why did she commit such a calculated, ritualistic act? Was it revenge? A psychological break? A final display of power? Some speculated the crime was premeditated to the highest degree, pointing to the place settings, the handwritten note, and the choice to skin and cook the body. Others believed it was an act of spontaneous rage, triggered by John Price's restraining order. Psychiatric evaluations painted a complex picture. Knight was allegedly diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and antisocial traits, but was still considered legally sane. Her prior relationships were also scrutinized. Previous partners had allegedly reported similar violent threats, though none ended in death. Ultimately, the consensus among both law enforcement and experts was chillingly simple. She meant to do it, and she knew exactly what she was doing. The trial of Katherine Knight began in October of 2001, but ended almost before it began. She initially pled not guilty to the murder of John Price, but days before the trial, she changed her plea to guilty, allegedly to spare her children the trauma of testimony. Despite the guilty plea, graphic crime scene images were shown to the court. Some jurors reportedly required therapy afterward. On November 8, 2001, Justice Barry O'Keefe sentenced Katherine Knight to life imprisonment without parole, the first woman in Australian history to receive such a sentence. He stated clearly, "You committed acts of unspeakable cruelty. You should never be released." Katherine is currently incarcerated at the Silverwater Women's Correctional Centre in New South Wales, where she remains to this day. Despite the conviction, some questions remain. Why did Katherine Knight go to such extreme lengths? Was it truly premeditated revenge, or a descent into uncontrollable madness? And the most disturbing question of all, would she have served her victim's remains to his children if she hadn't passed out first? The handwritten notes, the neatly arranged plates, the pot simmering on the stove, all suggest an intent that to this day defies comprehension. And though justice was served, the true motive behind her final act may never be fully understood. Some horrors remain locked inside the mind forever. The murder of John Price and the actions of Katherine Knight cast a permanent shadow over Aberdeen. Laws regarding domestic violence reporting and mental health evaluations in rural communities were re-examined. Criminal psychologists cite this case as a disturbing example of unchecked escalation and of how warning signs, if unheeded, can lead to the unthinkable. For the community, for John Price's children, and for those who saw the scene firsthand, the trauma endures. So, what do you think? What disturbing act was allegedly prepared but never consumed?
Could one decision, one intervention, have changed everything?
Let us know in the comments below. And remember, thank you for joining us on Mysteries and Crime. As always, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay safe.